Yaakov Avinu passes away in this week's parsha, and the Shvatim, his children, together bring his body to Israel for burial in the cave of the patriarchs in Maras Machpelah. And there's an interesting pasuk. What I'm about to say is from Tzvi Einstadter, one of the Rebbeim in Ner Yisrael Rabbinical College. He says, the pasuk says, "V'yavu ad Gerin ha'atid asher be'eva hayarden." They came upon the threshing floor of thorns by the Jordan River. Vayispedu sham misbeit gadol, and they had a lot of great eulogies. V'chibed ma'od, and they honored him greatly. Vayas la'aviv evel shivas yomim, and they made mourning for 7 days. So the Gemara asks a question on Sota 13a, also known as Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. The Chesiv, it says, "V'yavu ad Gerin ha'atid." They came to the threshing floor of thorns. V'chigorin yesh lo la'atid. Does a threshing floor have thorns? Right, a threshing floor is, like the Malach of Dash on Shabbos, where you have chaff and wheat, and you hit it on a floor to thresh, to get the wheat away, the kernels away from the chaff. So you don't thresh thorns. What's that talking about? So Amar Rabbi Vo says, "Malamed shehikufuhu kisarim la'arono shel Yaakov kegarin zeh shemakifin lo atam." He says that it's to teach us that they surrounded the coffin of Yaakov with crowns, like this threshing floor where there were thorns around the threshing floor to protect it. Shebo b'nei Esav and b'nei Yishmael, the children of Esav and the children of Yishmael b'nei Keturah, and the children of Keturah. Tana, kulam l'milchama bo, they all came to fight with the Shvatim, to make a war. Kevan shiro kisar shel Yosef, tali b'arono shel Yaakov, since they saw the crown of Yosef, which was hanging on the coffin of Yaakov, not lukulan kisreim utluyim ba'arono shel Yaakov. They came and they all put their crowns on the coffin of Yaakov. Tana, and it's taught, Shleishim v'shishik sarim nitlu ba'arono shel Yaakov. There were 36 crowns that were hung around the coffin of Yaakov. So what is this all about? What is this crowns? The nations of the world, the princes were coming to fight with the Jewish people some of the Jewish people, as they were coming to bury Yaakov by the Jordan River, and they put these crowns. They saw the crown of Yosef, and they put their crowns on it, the 70 nations. And there were 36 crowns in total. So, the Bnei Yissaschar says that Yaakov died on Sukkot, and then it says that they mourned in Egypt for 70 days. So 70 days after Sukkot comes out Hanukkah. On Hanukkah, we actually have 36 lights, 36 candles, all 8 days of Hanukkah, if you add them all up. Now, there's two opinions. What we do, we light the candles the first 9. 1, and then 2, then 3, then 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, very good. It's ready for yeshiva. Beis Shammai is the opposite. You start with 8, and you go 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, where does Beis Shammai learn that from? Beis Shammai learns that from the Parei HaChag, the cows that were brought during Sukkot. On Sukkot, cows were brought every day of Sukkot for the nations of the world, for the 70 nations. And all 70 cows were brought. And every day of Sukkot, there was a lower number of, you brought less cows than the day before on each day of Sukkot. Until the last day of Sukkot, you brought 1 cow. Shmini Atzeres, you brought 1 cow for the Jewish people. So Beis Shammai learns out, just like the cows, you went from the greater number to the lower number. So to on Hanukkah, we should start with 8 candles and go to 1 candle. What's this idea of? In fact, also, I'd like to add, did you know that one of the famous decrees that the Greeks made against the Jews was that they couldn't keep Shabbos, they couldn't do Rosh Chodesh, and they couldn't have Bris Milah. They actually made another enactment, another law that a lot of people don't know about. They said you couldn't keep Sukkot. The holiday of Sukkot was very offensive to them. What was so offensive about the holiday of Sukkot? So that what was so offensive to them about the holiday of Sukkot was this idea of the cows. We'll explain. The cows represented the nations of the world, and they are brought in descending order, because we're showing that we want the power of the nations of the world to decrease, and that eventually there's only 1 cow left on Shmini Atzeres, which is the Jewish people. Now, this isn't a type of Jewish nationalism and Jewish supremacy type of thing, but rather the Jewish people live to serve Hashem, as we talk about very often. The Jewish people live to serve Hashem. That's the goal of their lives. The nations of the world were not like that. They believed that they lived that the purpose of their life was to serve themselves and to be selfish and to just worry for themselves, just worry about their own business, and they didn't care about Kavod Shemayim. They don't care about Hashem. So we want on Sukkot, we bring these 17 cows to show the decreasing power of this ideology of the nations of the world until we're only left with one cow, which represents the Jewish people. When Mashiach comes, that the whole world is going to see that the true way to live is by living for Avodas Hashem, living to serve Hashem. So that's why we have on Sukkot the cows going in decreasing order, and that's why the Greeks were so offended by it. The Greeks' whole thing was that you're trying to be special and a godly nation. We don't like that. That's antithetical to everything we believe in. We believe in man's supremacy, in only believing in what you can see in front of you, things like that. So when we defeated the Greeks, Beis Shammai said we should have 8 candles and then go to 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to show the power of the Greeks wanes throughout Hanukkah, just like we do on Sukkot. And that's why the Greeks forbade specifically Sukkot, the Jews from keeping Sukkot, because they didn't like this idea of the Jewish people being special and the weakening of the power of the non-Jewish world. So now, why 36 crowns? Why, when they came, did they put 36 crowns around the coffin of Yaakov? So the Vilna Gaon says that there are the nations of the world, we always say the 70 nations, but they're really split into 2 groups. One group is the Esav is like the head, and the other group, Yishmael, is the head. And the 35 nations are like subsets of Esav and Yishmael. And 70 divided by 2 is 35. So the 35 crowns represent those nations of the world, and the last crown was Yosef's crown, representing the Jewish people. That's why it was around the coffin. Why they put specifically 36 crowns. Again, they put the 36 crowns, the 35 crowns which were from the nations of the world, and the 1 crown from Yosef, which represents the Jewish people. And this specifically happened on Hanukkah, Keneged, the 36 candles we bring on Hanukkah, which according to Beis Shammai shows the weakening of the power of the secular ideology and the strengthening of the Jewish ideology that the purpose of life is to serve Hashem. Now, why specifically at this point did they come with the crowns? And also, Rabbi Einstetter asked, why were they crossing the Jordan River? Anyone familiar with geography knows that Israel is here, and to the south is Egypt, and the Jordan River is on the east. So why were they crossing the Jordan River? Doesn't make any sense. So it says the reason they were crossing the Jordan River was because of the Shvatim, the tribes. They were carrying the coffin, Yaakov's coffin, the way that the Jewish people would travel when they would be taken out of Egypt, which was all the way around and then coming back around, crossing the Jordan to get into Israel.
Yaakov is the previous spirit of Yosef.
No, we're talking about Yaakov, when they buried Yaakov. Meaning the Shvatim buried Yaakov, and when they traveled to Israel, they didn't go straight like this. They went all the way around, and they came over the Yarden. And that's why the nations of the world came to put their crowns specifically at this point of the journey, because the redemption of the Jews from Egypt represents the victory of the Jewish people and their ideology versus the destruction of Egypt and the ideology of the nations of the world. So they're putting the crowns on the coffin of Yosef represented their subjugation to Jewish ideology and the fact that the purpose of life is to serve Hashem. Also, besides that, the tribes stood in a certain way. When we left Egypt, the tribes were in a certain spot all around the Mishkan, and when they traveled with Yaakov's coffin, they were standing, each tribe, they were still alive then, right? Reuben, Shimon, Yehuda, Levi, Bechulu. They were standing, shouldn't say Bechulu, they were standing around the coffin like their descendants would stand when they were leaving Egypt. So we're saying that the nations of the world came and put their 35 crowns, representing to show that our ideology is eventually going to be destroyed with the leaving of the Jewish people from Egypt, and that's the first redemption. That originally should have been the end of the story. We would have gotten the Torah, and Mashiach would have been here and everything, but there was the whole golden calf episode, which we'll get to in a few weeks, and things like that, which isn't the end of the story. But the end of human history is the Jewish ideology that the purpose of life is to serve Hashem, that is the reason why a person should live. That's the reason for a person's life, and that's the goal he should put in his all of his kaiches, all of his strengths. We say a little bit, and we think about Jewish values. By Jewish values, I mean Torah values. I don't mean like Tikkun Olam and what people say are Jewish values, but it's really just leftist, liberal values that they like to call Jewish for some reason. I don't know. It's cultural, what I call cultural appropriation. But you look at people who keep the Torah and how they act versus the nations of the world and what they value, and look at the stories and like the people who we idealize in the community. Like who are all the kids like reading books about in the frum world? Like Gedolim, people like that sat and study Torah and did chesed for their whole lives. Whereas in the secular world, you're like reading about LeBron. I mean, if you were my age, right? LeBron doesn't even have the guts to stand up against China to. What was it? Yeah, the NBA totally folded to China for something, even though they're. I forgot, they were speaking out against America, and also the fact that they were have all these people in sweatshops and things like that. LeBron, all these like social justice warriors, they don't have the guts to stand up when there's actually a problem because they're going to lose some money. They don't say anything.
It's all about the money with that.
It's all about the Benjamins. And John Fetterman just said today that I guess they just condemned Sudan. There's genocide going on in Sudan right now, and John Fetterman asked like, how come nobody is like protesting me right now? You know, like they were with Israel, and nobody's saying anything. So there's a total hypocrisy.
I mean, that's been going on for like 100 years.
Totally.
Blacks killing blacks, one tribe killing another.
Right, but nobody cares.
For some reason, one tribe thinks they're superior to the others, and it doesn't make any sense. They're all the same people.
Nobody cares. Nobody cares because people aren't really true to their values. They don't really have values. Their really values are is that they want to attack the Jews. But I remember when I was a young man in 6th grade, we all looked up to a fellow named P. Diddy. And we liked him very much.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, I was 12 at the time, so I'm just pointing out of what a. I'm just saying, look what a secular kid looks up to, versus a kid in Lakewood is reading stories about Rav Elyashiv and Rubashkin, people that had a lot of bitachon and studied a lot of Torah. It's a big difference. There's a story I like to tell. I've told it a few times, but I really like it. It's also relevant to Manalapan. Before Mrs. Amron was the Hebrew school teacher in Sons of Israel, for those of you, nobody here would probably know, whatever. There was a Rabbi Ammon. He was actually my Hebrew school principal when I was in 2nd grade at Sons of Israel over here. So one day he was driving with his wife on 440 in Staten Island, and they got off at exit 4 because he wanted to visit the cemetery there where his father was buried, because it was his yard site. So he gets off and he says some Tehillim there, and he sees someone comes up to him and says, you know, we're burying this person and there's only 9 people. Could you be part of the minyan? So he says, of course. And he stayed for the service. And after the service, everyone left. And they said, we're not going to bury him. And the people said, well, no, they're just going to bulldoze it in. So they all left, and he said, I can't let another Jew be buried like that. It's a mitzvah. So he stood there for an hour and a half and buried the man himself. So first of all, who else would do that besides a Jew? Do something that nice, swarmer.
What does it mean bulldozing?
Oh no, they like bulldoze dirt. The workers.
Yeah, they'll only put like several shops and then they leave.
I was at a funeral for non-Torah observant Jews, and like everybody came with a little spoon to like put a spoon of dirt in, and then my father and I started putting dirt in, and the clergy person there was very upset because you could tell that he wanted to go home, and we were bothering him by making him stay there longer. And judging by the type of watch and jewelry he had, he wasn't necessarily in it for the right reasons in that profession. But anyway, so Rabbi Ammon, is very tired. He heads home, but he wrote down the person's name on the thing. Try to find out who was this guy that he just buried. He wanted to find out about him. And he called Rabbi Herman Neuberger, who was the president of Ner Israel. He passed away in 2005. Rabbi Herman Neuberger, he knew him because he went to Ner Israel, and Rabbi Neuberger knew everybody. He just he was totally involved in every aspect of the Jewish world. And he called Rabbi Neuberger. He says, hey, just totally shot in the dark here. Do you happen to know about this guy? And Rabbi Neuberger dropped the phone. He said, remember when you were a kid your father wanted to send you to yeshiva and he couldn't afford it. He says, I never told you this, but there was a man who sponsored your tuition all your years in yeshiva. That guy you just buried was the man who sponsored your tuition. That was the story. So, besides, and if you want, Rabbi Ammon, you can watch on YouTube. Rabbi Ammon is on telling the story himself, so you hear it from the horse's mouth. Now, a few things we can take out of that story. One is that Hashem doesn't let any good deed go unpunished. I mean, that's another way to say it. Hashem rewards every good deed. Also, look at the chesed that was done altruistically from Jews. One person spent an hour and a half burying another Jew by himself. He was a rabbi. I remember he wasn't like in the best shape, and he's like a rabbi. He wasn't like a world-class athlete or something. And then another person wants to sponsor the tuition of someone in yeshiva. I'm not sure. In the secular world, to my knowledge, I don't think there's like too many people that are going to sponsor someone's like Harvard scholarship so that they can learn about like dance theory or something like that. The Jewish people are very, very special. My yeshiva was once on a flight. He went to the bathroom and he started making asher yatzer. And there's a professor sitting next to him, and the professor said, "Well, why are you talking to yourself?" He says, "I'm making a blessing." He said, "Whoa, what are you making a blessing on?" He said, "I'm making a blessing. I went to the bathroom and I'm making a blessing." So the professor said, "Wow, you Jews are really a strange people." He says, "You take the most mundane, earthly act and you sanctify it." And he was shocked. It's really true. Who would think even going to the bathroom for us is a way to serve Hashem? That's our whole view of life is just totally different. It has nothing to do with the view of life of the secular world. They're just worried about money and power, and we're thinking about how can I come close to Hashem even if I just went to the bathroom. Totally different worldview. And it's a pressure. It's a pressure to hold tight to those values given the surrounding culture. We bless. Ephraim and Menashe are blessed in this week's parsha, and we bless our kids. Like Ephraim and Menashe every Friday night. Menashe! Why do we bless our kids like Ephraim and Menashe? Why specifically Ephraim and Menashe?
Because they didn't fight. Like the other, like Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov and Yosef, they fought with their brothers, but Ephraim and Menashe didn't fight.
Okay.
Also, because they grew up in a world that's not like religious and maintain
right.
their Yiddish faith.
Right, so that's what Rav David Feinstein says. Rav David Feinstein says, Ephraim and Menashe, probably here 3 years ago in essence. Rav David Feinstein said, Ephraim and Menashe, they were the children of Yosef, who was the second most powerful person in Egypt. They grew up in Egypt. And they still not only held true to their faith, as we would say in Yiddish, they steiged. They learned with their grandfather, they learned with Yaakov, they learned Torah with Yaakov. Now this is akin to, they were the upper echelon of Egyptian society.
What about Abraham? Abraham didn't, he grew up in Haran or Kazim.
Good point. I'm saying that this answer doesn't. Valid point. Makabel. But here, there's an added element of Ephraim and Menashe that I don't know if you had by Abraham, that they were on the highest level of society, right? They were like the top. It's like they were like the William and Harry of Egypt. So like imagine.
Nobody knows who that is.
Oh, William and Harry are the princes in England, and they don't.
William and Harry.
Yeah, they don't get along now, but they used to get along.
I'm speaking for myself.
Yeah, Meghan, they got in the way. The whole thing. You look it up. Einschum, Wikipedia. Anyway, but can you imagine like
alive?
William and Harry are very much still alive. Yeah, they're like 40. But
Father's King Charles.
imagine the kids of King Charles, instead of
King Charles III.
going to clubs. Harry was constantly getting into trouble by doing things he shouldn't have been in clubs and whatnot, and hanging out with people that didn't properly represent the kavod of the malchus, the dignity of the kingship. So can you imagine William and Harry, instead of engaging in all their parties and doing all their fancy polo events, they went to Yerushalayim to go learn in some yeshiva in Mea Shearim? That's what Ephraim and Menashe did. They weren't going to the parties. They weren't going to all the fancy polo matches in Egypt or whatever they did back in the day. They went to Goshen. They went to the ghetto to learn Torah with their grandfather Yaakov. So people like that, you should bless them. And that's why really, to think about, you have to really love yeshiva bachrim nowadays. You have to love a yeshiva bachrim. Instead, there's such a desire to go and become a wealthy person and become successful in your chosen profession, because that's all the world values now. I think it's worse now. I see with the younger folks, not at the table, but other younger folks, just like watching TikTok all day on YouTube, where it's totally glorifying like money. Just like, I mean, everyone always glorified money, but I just feel it's like so much more in your face than when I was growing up, because you're like always seeing it like, just like in money in stupid ways, just like doing stupid things. I don't know, like, you saw a guy like flew a plane and jumped out of it and like let the plane crash a few years ago. Genius.
Oh, that's
just
he pretended those things.
Right. So anyway, people just like throw away money, and that's like to be cool and to be popular and that's the value now. But instead of choosing that lifestyle, so I'm going to go study Torah in yeshiva. I'm going to spend studying rabbinic texts from thousands of years ago and getting close to Hashem. You think like in what other culture and what other religion would people do that? And you guys are lucky. You realize that's the true life. That's how a person becomes happy. So Ephraim and Menashe did that, and that's exactly what the yeshiva bachrim do nowadays. Oh, you know who says like you? That because they got along, Rav Felder. So Rav Felder from Toronto says that. But somebody, to answer your question, why don't we don't bless like Abraham? My Shiva said because the Avos were like a special level. Abraham and Yaakov were a special level that everything that they did became part of the DNA of the Jewish people. That their descendants, we have certain things that are part of our spiritual DNA because of what Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov did. For example, Abraham was about chesed. He did kindness. So that means that all of his descendants become kind. It's like part of us. Anyone besides Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that doesn't apply to. So you can be a very righteous person, doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be part of the DNA. So it's not shaykh. It can't be that we could be blessed to be like Abraham because it's not possible. We can't get to that level. However, we could get to the level of Ephraim and Menashe. That's how he would answer your question. Okay, so just to conclude, the Jewish people, we live to serve Hashem, and that's the purpose of life, and the nations of the world are constantly antagonistic towards that. But there are certain times, eventually it's going to happen, where they'll recognize that the Jewish people had it right the whole time. And that's why, when they were about to enter the land of Israel with the coffin of Yaakov, all the kings of the world came and they put crowns on next to the crown of Yosef to show we're honoring you and we are really subservient to you and your ideology.
He's very
Right.